So, welcome back to the Defiant Spirit. I'm Baruch Levy, also known as B. And if you're watching, you can tell quite clearly that I am not alone today in this podcast. I have my friend, Julie Mouse. Hi, Julie.
Hi, B. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So, for those of you who don't know Julie, she's a mindfulness teacher, she's an Enneagram teacher. We have so much in common. And also, I know you haven't formally studied Frankl, but I also know you're a big fan. And a lot of your work really revolves around some of my shared teachings from him. And we'll get into that. But Julie, would you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey?
Well, thanks, B. I am so excited to be on this podcast. I have been in the mental health field forever. I'm a clinical social worker. And about 15 years ago, one of my kids was diagnosed with ADHD. And I was looking for non-pharmacological ways to treat it. And when you're late at night, like moms do, trying to problem solve on Google, mindfulness just popped up everywhere. And although I was a yoga practitioner and knew something about it, I hadn't really developed my own practice. And so I decided to try this. My 10-year-old wasn't going to try it, but I decided to try it myself. And I was pretty amazed just personally with the benefits of a mindfulness practice. So I kind of shifted gears from psychotherapy to teaching mindfulness as an avenue for mental health, and where I intersect with Dr. Frankl's work is that it's exactly that that pause that we'll talk about his big quote, but that pause, that magic that happens when we learn to pause, and it's what you practice when you meditate. Every time you see a thought and you bring your attention back to your breath, you're creating that ability to pause and choose a different way to be.
And how does the Enneagram fit into this dynamic practice that you have?
Well, so I came upon the Enneagram a little bit later when I was already teaching mindfulness. And as I'm teaching, so again, back to this idea of the pause, as I'm teaching people to use mindfulness as a tool for pausing. It's very clear that it's super hard to do. We have these habitual ways of being. And I'd be working with someone and they'd be like, yeah, I know what's going on. I know where I need to shift, but I just keep doing the same thing over and over. And when I learned about the Enneagram, and what the way it relates is that when you know more about yourself, the more self-awareness you have, basically your ability to catch yourself in those situations goes up. If you already know, oh, this is a situation where I don't do so well, your chances of finding that pause and finding that magical ability to do things differently exponentially increases.
Hmm. Yeah, I love the idea that, there is not a type, there's not a way, there's not a mindfulness practice, right? Everybody's unique, but the Enneagram I would imagine would offer us, offers us some kind of parameters, some direction of, an 8 might struggle in this way, whereas a 2 might struggle in this way, and it's around mindfulness. So I want to get into that, and maybe we can look at some of the different ways mindfulness can be most beneficial to each number.
Well, and since you brought that up, the next big thing is as someone who's working with people to help them create better choices in their life, it's also so healthy to see that everyone does it differently. So that was
Mhm.
such great insight for me with the Enneagram is that there are 9 different ways that we handle that situation, and that understanding is really critical.
Let's definitely look at that, and let's definitely talk about our collaboration and where we sort of see working together. Because not only is Julie a friend, but as you can hear, total alignment with values and vision. And as we're building out the Meaning Academy, for those of you who haven't heard, we started the Viktor Frankl Meaning Academy based in Denver, but it's going to be also virtual. And so just putting together a team of really inspirational people to bring these ideas out to the world in different ways. We'll talk to you about that. But I'm just so excited to flesh this out with Julie, and you get to be a part of this great conversation that I know is unfolding. So let's start with Dr. Frankel and this quote, because I know it's on your website. I saw, if you want to check out Julie's website, it's Mindful Mouse, MAUS, is it .com?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Mindful mouse. Just Google mindful mouse. Aren't too many mindful mice out there. MAUS, not MIC. So between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space lies our freedom and our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our happiness. Let me just say that first line again. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. So tell us more about this. I want to say verse because it's only holy to me, but this quote.
Well, for me, when I first met B, I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is where the intersection happens is with Viktor Frankl," because I already had that quote on my website. And I every time I teach a mindfulness course, I teach 8-week courses where people learn how to make mindfulness a part of their life. I always talk about that quote because the course is called mindfulness based stress reduction because it's learning to use mindfulness to reduce your reactivity to stress and how you handle stress. And so about midway through the course, I always pull this quote out because when I first heard the quote, I thought, oh, that's interesting. Between stimulus and response, there's a space. Yeah, I'm teaching people to find that space so that they can choose a different response. And through mindfulness, you find that space by noticing that you're in a stressful situation and employing a mindfulness technique, like, say, bringing yourself to your breath, letting your body settle a little bit, and then allowing your frontal cortex to turn back on so you can make a healthy decision. But it was a while after I heard that quote, but before I had the personal experience of that space. And
Mhm.
wow, it's really a space. Like if you haven't felt that space, keep working on it because when you feel it, when something happens to you and you pause and you feel all the sensations that are happening instead of doing what you normally do, you realize, wow, there's space there between when something happens and when I do something. And in that space, I can choose a completely way. I'm not just a puppet on the end of a string who reacts to things the way it's just me. It's just Julie. That's how I behave. Actually, I'm choosing to do that. And when I
Mhm.
find the space that literally you can feel it, it's palpable. The choice might be the same, but it might be different. And that feels so freeing.
That right there is just logotherapy in a nutshell. Logos means meaning. It's meaning centered healing and living, and it comes down to what you just said, which is, can you be in that space, take back your power of, we don't control our circumstances. We just don't. We think we do. We're in an illusion that we control, but we don't. All we control is our response or lack thereof, which we will call reaction. Right? You're either reacting or you're
What
responding.
does logotherapy say about how to catch that space? Because it's so fleeting. I mean, it's so like, oh gosh, I did it again. I know there's some space there, but I don't know how I'll never be able to find it.
Look, Dr. Frankl offered some good techniques and strategies. I would say that isn't necessarily the power of logotherapy. He designed it to be an adjunct to other traditions, whether it's religion or psychotherapies or other healing traditions. And I do really think it works well. To me, it's more of Frankl talks a lot about the why and the how. The why is purpose, it's direction, and the how are all the steps to get there. And Frankl
Mhm.
deals much more in the why. And I think that he helps people really reclaim a sense of why, of purpose. But we need more, Julies and mindfulness teachers and whatever it might be to show us how to expand the space, I call it. What do you do inside that space?
So I
And
see
that's what
where
you
the
do. Yeah.
Enneagram goes so perfectly with the why, because it's each number you learn about why you behave that way. It's rooted in this desire that helps you, like I said, catch it if you're more aware of it. But yeah, mindfulness is more the how because even physiologically, it's hard to catch it because when we're activated, flight or fight shuts our frontal cortex down. So we almost like can't access clear thinking unless we pause, unless we breathe and
Right.
bring our attention into our body to literally calm that flight or fight response, which we're capable of doing. We just think, oh, that's just the way I am.
Yeah, and so our work, your work is around, okay, that's great, Julian B, between stimulus and response, there's a space and I got to get into that space. Well, what does that look like? How do I experience that? How do I expand the space? How do I know I'm in that space? And you and I have spoken before. You said, you know, um, at a bodily level when you're in that space. Isn't that something you've said?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of us don't know because we want to get out of it so fast. And part of our reactivity is our body's way of getting us out of that reaction.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
we do what we do and it gets us out of it. But if we can pause and bring our attention, it's unbelievable what's happening in our body. Now, as a 9, I can see why it was hard for me to sense that space because I don't like discomfort. I don't like feeling uncomfortable. And if I pause and put my attention here, it's really uncomfortable. But if I do my habitual response, I can pretend none of it's happening.
So,
However,
just for our listeners, a 9 is a peacemaker,
yeah,
right?
right.
In the Enneagram realm.
I'm a peacemaker in the
Yeah.
Enneagram, so I'm very conflict avoidant. And so it was really hard to find that space because that meant turning my attention to what I want to avoid the most.
Well, also, as you know, as an Enneagram teacher, telling our audience, 8, 9, and 1, there are many triads on the Enneagram. One of the primary triads, the center of intelligence, how we take in information, process information. 8, 9, and 1, the challenger, the peacemaker, and the reformer, or the perfectionist, are body types and gut types, action types. It's just so interesting because eights go all into action. So like when I'm in reaction, when I'm not in that space, I just do. I don't, I'm ready. I'm not even ready. I'm fire, aim, ready. Like I'm fire, 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 ready,
Mhm.
aim. And a 9 probably goes away from the body and it's more like ready, 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 aim, ready, ready. And a 1 just goes inwards. They almost turn on themselves and implode. So they're just different ways that we experience ourselves in our body.
Mhm.
So paying
Yeah.
attention in a different way to each of those.
And then so understanding that people do it differently is so valuable too. Because when I see my husband is an 8, and when I see him going into this reactive, it might be a little bit of an intense energy. Instead of being like, "What's wrong with him?" or upset about it, that's a sign to me that he's under stress.
Mhm.
And so
Isn't
it
that
helps.
interesting? He has the exact opposite response as you probably.
Yes, the exact opposite. It's very entertaining in our house.
I have 4 kids, 2 daughters. One daughter's a 9, one daughter's an 8, and the 8 continuously telling her to take a deep breath, go to her corner. She's 18 years old, right? Like, take a time out, before you hit send, before you say that what you're about to say. And my
Mm,
9, it's like, say something, do something, use your voice, right? So
yeah.
their space is totally different, that
Mhm.
space.
Right, and it's hard for both of them to catch it, right? Because the 9's
Mhm.
avoiding seeing it, and the 8, it's out of their mouth before they can even sense it.
And that's the work, is expanding the space. So my space used to be a lot less than it is now. I think there's lots of reasons why. Life kicks you in the butt and,
Yeah.
testosterone drops and all these kind of like things that are just happening. And so I can see now in her that lack of space, when I probably was no different at age 18 and learning how to expand the space. And so I think that that's the work we're all here to do to
Mhm.
get it bigger and bigger and bigger to the point where we're like, some enlightened Buddha on a mountaintop and totally in control. I'll let you know when that happens. I'm not there.
Yeah. Eckhart Tolle, I don't know how you say his last name, but he
Totally.
talks
Yeah,
about, one of Tali, is that how you say it?
I think so.
I think. Okay. So he taught in one of his books, he talks about how everyone's gonna have something happen to them where they wake up and realize they need to pause more or find that space more. And someone, if you haven't had something, he says, if you haven't had something happen yet,
Just wait.
just wait because you're a human, so it's gonna happen, right? Or you could try and choose to practice now. And when I talk about learning mindfulness, I'm like, if you learn it without something tragic happening to you, how critical and how important it is to just start pausing every time, say in a little meditation practice where you pause and you put your attention on your breath, say your breath at your belly. And you notice that your attention's been drifting away to something else, like some work assignment you forgot to do, and then you bring your attention back to your belly. You've just exercised your ability to pause. You've just exercised your brain's capacity to come to stillness instead of reactivity. And each
Mhm.
time you do it, it's kind of like you're exercising your brain's capacity so that when the stressful thing happens, you pause instead of going down the rabbit hole.
I was just speaking with somebody who was kind of challenging me a bit. I think I just have a sign on my head that says challenger, right? So they just give it to me, no holds barred. And they said, you talk about breath so much. Every mindfulness teacher, every yogi, every tradition, breath, 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 breath. Why? Like, give me something new, creative, innovative, different. I said, in all candidness, I said, look, do you make love with your spouse? Yes. Do you ever say, we just did that? Right? We've done that before. Check the box. We're done. Like the good stuff in life isn't a checkbox. Each time it's unique and special, and nobody says, "Well, we did that last year." So the same with breath, and every moment. There's this great Buddhist teaching where basically a few thousand years ago, the student says to the teacher something similar, and the teacher holds his head underwater, the student's head underwater, and he's thrashing around, whatever. And he lets the student up. He says, your breath is pretty special now, isn't it? Right.
Yeah,
Like,
I've heard that. Yeah.
so, but you mentioned breath multiple times. So let's dig into that. Why do all these traditions, do all these, practices come back to the breath? What is it about the breath?
Well, I think of it in terms of like exercise. We go to the gym, you want to get stronger for a sport you do, you go to the gym and it's not fun, it's boring, kind of like the breath. But you do it and you get stronger. You want to run a 10K, you go out and you run and you exercise it. You want to be able to know what's happening in your mind. Every time you bring your attention to your breath, you've just done like a barbell. You've just exercised your brain's capacity to pause. And this is what we're here talking about. That capacity to pause is life changing. You get to be the master of what you do instead of you're just habitual. Most of what we do just comes right from this little space, this amygdala space. We're kind of like a puppet on a string, and people don't realize it. And so, breath is the space where you can anchor your attention so that you can notice how crazy you are. Because when you try and anchor your attention on your breath, you start to notice, oh, look, I think about that a lot. I think about that. Okay, let's come back to our breath. And it's like you're at the gym and you're just
Mhm.
exercising your capacity to be in charge of you.
You're talking about that. It reminds me of the movie with Dustin Hoffman, The Graduate. Do you remember The Graduate?
Yeah. Yeah.
He's like at this life crossroads. He's got to go out into the world and find his way, and everybody's talking to him, whatever. And he just jumps into the water in the swimming pool, and he just sinks to the bottom, and he just sits there, and you just see him like at peace.
I
And
love
I think I've thought about that. One of the reasons why yeah, exactly. He's just holding his breath, right? He's just, it's quiet. There's a
yeah. The stillness.
control, a stillness, at the bottom. Everybody can relate to that. The bottom of a swimming pool for just a few moments.
That is such a good visual for what happens. And it's just from like, I mean, obviously he's not breathing when he's underwater, but the focus on the breath gives you the ability to have the experience that you'd have at the bottom of a pool, where you just are all of a sudden still and watching what's happening instead of actively thinking, doing all day long.
Well, I mean, not breathing is part of the breathing process, and that's a major piece of the mindfulness practice, as you know, right? Is holding the breath, being able to hold it for longer and longer. I forgot the guy's name, the cold bath guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. How would you like that to be your legacy? I don't know his name, but the cold bath guy, right?
I'm cold that guy.
But he
Yeah.
has an app that I was doing for a while. It was helpful. I was like holding my breath longer and longer and longer and longer, and just it's a control, right? I mean, there's
Mm.
just a control element. When my youngest was baby, he was at a very young age. He would hold his breath when he was crying, and we learned he was manipulating us, and he would pass out. And the doctor said, we said,
My
"What do we
son did that.
do?"
My son did the
Yeah,
same thing.
it's terrifying. He turns blue, and like we were on an airplane the first time it happened, and so we said to the doctor, "What do we do?" He said, "Let him pass out. Like, he'll wake up. He's going to hold his breath." It's like it's easier said than done, right? But the bottom line was there's a controlling element to it.
Right,
It's
right.
all we control.
Yeah.
Really, what else do you control other than your breath? Or do you know?
Yes, and it brings us out of here, putting our attention on our breath. I think some people don't understand because they're like, "What do you mean, take a few breaths? I'm breathing all the time. I don't get it. What, like, I'm taking a few breaths already, whether you said that or not." And when I, in the very start of classes, when I first teach a beginner, I talk about it's not about taking the breath, it's about putting your attention on the inhale and on the exhale as a way to take your attention off where it usually is. 99.9% of the time, your attention is on your thoughts. And because we're human beings trying to keep ourselves alive, our thoughts are constantly scanning the future. What could go wrong? Our thoughts, when we don't if we're not focused on something, we're scanning our environment. We're thinking about the future. We're thinking about planning. We're constantly, or we're thinking about the past so that we can remember things to keep us safe. Just we've evolved to be that way. We've the most anxious people are the people who had children because they survived. They didn't get killed because they paid attention. Well, thus we've
Mhm,
evolved to be a pretty anxious people. And so the breath is intentionally stopping that. Like, oh,
mhm.
I'm going to bring my attention here. I don't have to think about that thing I need to do because 99% of what you think of today, you thought of yesterday already. We just are constantly
Mhm.
cycling them through, making ourselves crazy.
And it's a survival strategy, like you said. That's why I love the Enneagram in its authentic form, not oftentimes the way it's taught, like I am an Enneagram 8. No, it's actually I react, I survive. I'm outrunning the woolly mammoth as an 8 would
Yeah.
10,000 years ago. It's not who
Yeah.
I am,
Yes. Well, I
right?
think that's why we get so attached to our numbers habitual reaction. So mine being conflict avoidant or you're being like, hey, I can catch this woolly mammoth. I'm gonna kill him and got dinner for the whole community and I'm the hero or whatever. Is because we have this it has this plus side to it that people give you a lot of praise for. So, I mean, I get a lot of, "Oh, Julie, you're so easygoing. You're so awesome. Oh, I love calling you. You always make me feel better." So I get a lot of praise for being that way. And so I'm like, why would I want to change it? And
It's
so I
true.
think some of that keeps us from seeing where it's not so good, where it gets us in lots of trouble.
That's why, as you've experienced, I'm sure, when people read the entirety of their Enneagram type, there's the ick factor. And the ick
Mhm.
factor is like, I don't like this number. I don't want this number, right? And it points out the blind spots. That's the definition of a blind spot. You can't necessarily see it if you haven't done the work. And a lot of people don't like that, the opposite of the praise.
Mhm. Yeah, I know
Um,
I did when
yeah.
I didn't like it at all. I wanted to be a 7.
Everybody wants to be a 7. I've never met
Yeah,
anybody who doesn't actually want to be a 7. Maybe a 5 would that sounds like hell for a 5, but,
yeah, right.
nobody says, "I wanna be an 8 hole." Right? "I wanna be an 8 and just, like, tear through life," and right? No, people do say, "No, 9s are pretty nice," and, whatever, but the bottom line is, none of them are us. It's how we've learned to survive.
Mhm.
And like you say, do you wanna live in that place of survival, of holding I think about, like, I caught myself I was just watching something, it wasn't a scary movie, but it was a scary scene, and I'm, doing this work, I paid attention to the fact I'm holding my breath.
Mm.
Like, if you look around the audience, I mean, the viewers of the movie, I'm sure everybody's holding their breath. How many people actually know they're holding their breath?
Yeah, right.
And who's in charge? The director, because he planned it or she planned it, right? So at this moment, you'd end up being scared. Hold your breath, victory, right? And like that's fine for a movie, it's entertainment. But do I want to live that way out in the streets, out in the world, where everybody's
Well,
causing me to
I'll
hold
take
my breath?
one step further in that, I don't like scary movies and I don't like super violent movies. And my kids don't like me watching them with them because they say I always ruin it for them. Because if there's something that's breath holding, or for me, I'm not much of a breath holder, but I embody the tension that's on the screen. And so I'll be like, does anyone else stomach feel super tense right now? Why do they call this entertainment? Do you not notice that this is not fun?
So you take them out of their, their moment, right?
And they're
Bring
like,
in
"Mom,
some.
you shouldn't watch this with us."
I think part of that is it's always been interesting to me. This is not necessarily a conversation on the nine, but since you are one, it makes sense. Um, so many creatives are nines. You look at like Jim Henson and George Lucas and Mr. Rogers. I mean, there's so many creative forces that are or were nines. I think partially there's like an attunement to that sensitivity.
Well, sure. I mean, I think part of the reason I was drawn to mindfulness in addition to just a curiosity from my mental health background is, if the nine's motivation is to find peace, wow, meditation is a pretty awesome place to find peace. Almost to the extreme. Like I also had to learn to balance that out because, I could have also taken that to an extreme where, I'm just going to go meditate because nine can use that as a way to avoid.
Mhm.
But when you are motivated to find peace, it's in that place of pause or in that space that creativity can come in. So when I talked about how 99% of the time our thoughts are on present or future, there's nothing creative in that space. But
Mhm.
when you choose to come into, oh, I'm just going to focus on my breath, you almost allow for creativity to arise because you're not thinking about future or past. But if you don't search for that space in your life, it's hard to be creative. I mean, you hear musicians talk about that when they're writing. I was just listening to a special with Bruce Springsteen. He was talking about what he had to do to find the space to be creative for one of his albums. And it sounded very much like finding that space so that he could get out of his head and what he thought he should write and get into here and have the music come from there.
Yeah, and as you know, part of the work of that nine is to not avoid the conflict. It's also to go into the conflict, right? Because there's juice in there too. And I see
Mhm.
nines really come alive when they can hold whatever the space brings, not just the easy, om space.
Yes. So what the course I teach, I said, is called mindfulness based stress reduction. And it's all about learning to be with discomfort. How can we not allow when discomfort arises, how can we not do our habitual 9 ways of responding to that? How can we be with discomfort? Because there's so much value in the ability, not only because it gives you the space to choose something different, but it also in like pain. So this course I teach started in hospitals for people who had chronic pain, and this Buddhist practitioner, John Kabat-Zinn, thought, oh, I'm going to teach him this mindfulness practice. And he created an 8-week course that they taught at the hospital. And because he really believed that the doctors were missing something in teaching people how to manage pain. Because when you look at pain and you think, pain, what happens? The body responds by tightening up, which causes more pain. Where if you can learn to feel pain and feel the sensation instead and learn to send your breath there and relax into the pain and be with the pain, then the body doesn't tighten up. You allow more blood flow, which reduces the pain.
Mhm. When I struggle with sleep, as an example, my first reaction is pop a pill. And I have to fight against that. And I do have my Ambien, but I moved it away from my bed. It's up in the medicine cabinet. I use it now when I travel because, it's just too easy. And it's
Mhm.
probably not good on a regular, I'm sure it's not good on a regular basis. And it's easy, like I'll just pop that thing, go to sleep, as opposed to, no, I got to do the work, right? Who wants to work at 10 o'clock at
Yeah,
night, laying in bed,
right.
doing my work, paying attention, getting into that space, expanding the space. So,
We
we have
sleep is
power, we have agency.
yes,
Say it
we
again?
do. I think sleep is such an interesting place to bring a little mindfulness, because for most of us, not all of us, but sleep issues are because we're in the thinking mind. And every thought you have, your body reacts to. Every thought, there's a reaction here. And so if it's a little anxious or a little spinny on something, the body's reacting and it's not going to go to sleep.
And so, the center of my work, of Frankel's work, clearly of your work, is to take back your power, your agency, your ability to choose. That's what this whole text is about. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space lies our freedom, our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our happiness. This is really about becoming free. So again,
Yeah,
nothing wrong with something outside of yourself to help you, but something debilitating if we can't get there without it.
exactly. Exactly. And it comes from the ability to find that freedom. I think, first of all, I think a lot of people don't know that they're not free. They just feel like they're doing their thing. They don't realize that they're just responding to chemical reactions going on in here. And then the minute you learn, oh, I could do it differently, it's very challenging. And so practicing in any way, I was just at a yoga class today, and the instructor was talking to me about, or talking to the group about, when you're in poses, and notice how quickly the mind is talking to you about how you're doing the pose, whether you're doing it right or wrong, whether you should go deeper or not, and see if you can just bring your attention to your body, how it feels. And I'm like, oh, that was such a great cue, trying to get people to notice that even in a yoga class, our mind's up here working its thing. And yet we could choose to just bring it here. And in that, that's where you are practicing creating space in your life.
And anybody who thinks they're free is not awake, because we live in a culture where, I'm on Amazon buying crap that I'm like, what am I doing? Or I'm eating and I'm not hungry.
Mhm.
Right? There's so many times during your day you can catch yourself and see you are not free until you are. Like our whole conversation is about you can be free, but not until you're choosing to eat, as opposed to, oh, the Doritos are choosing for me. And that's because I saw them on a Super Bowl halftime show. And that's because, it's like,
Yeah.
where's our power? Where's our agency?
Or you're choosing to be up at 10 o'clock at night working on something versus I'm up at 10 o'clock at night working on something because it was on my to-do list. So I have to finish it. I can't go to bed until I do it. Hmm. Okay. Can you
Um,
choose?
and challenging also the language. We'll have a whole other conversation on this, but I think language really shapes our reality. And when I hear people say something like, I don't have a choice, right? That's a
Yeah.
lie.
Yeah.
It's a lie. You always have a choice.
Yeah.
Well, B, how could you say that? Like, I'm grieving my loved one. I don't have a choice. You absolutely do not have a choice over whether or not your loved one is alive or dead. You only have a choice of whether or not you follow in their footsteps and die prematurely, or if you live. Like, that's your choice. You know, let's
Mhm.
let's break that down. Let's break it down into a day, into a moment, into an hour, into a moment, right here, right now. Like, owning your choice.
So
That's freedom.
in Buddhism, there's this story of the two arrows. Have you heard that story? The warrior who
Tell us the story.
the warrior. So a warrior is in a battle and he gets hit in his leg with an arrow, and he lies down and he starts going, "Oh my gosh, my wife is going to leave me. I'm not going to be able to provide for my children. I won't be able to help out with this war, and we're going to lose. And I'm not going to have a job because I'll never be able to walk again." And it's almost as if he took another arrow and stuck it in his head. The suffering the suffering he was having was more over all the thoughts of the impending doom than the pain in his leg. And the idea of the fable is we can't stop arrows. We can't stop the first arrows in our life, but we have complete choice over the second arrows, over
Right.
how we react to the first arrows. And then there's some of us who have a second arrow and there was never even a first arrow. Like
Mhm.
you walk into your house and it's a mess, and next thing you know, you've gone into this thing, and because there's not even a first arrow. It's just that you've created this, my house should look a certain way. And so starting to notice those second arrows, and that that you have a choice over whether you want to do those or not. Again, I mean, I just think that's so freeing. I don't have to go down that rabbit hole of my reaction to what's already suffering, because life, we're human, we're going to suffer. It's just,
And all we have is the power to choose our response. And Frankl says, this is yours until your dying breath. Right. And that's
mhm,
just always like, my God, I have power, agency, even on my deathbed. How will I take this final breath? What will I think? What will I, convey? How will I leave this world? And to me, that's, his text, right? In that space lies our freedom and our power. And our power is only and ever choosing our response.
yeah, right. And it's so when I told the story in the beginning about how when I'd heard that quote and like, oh, that's kind of interesting. But the first time I actually felt it, and I think it was after I'd done some Enneagram work, and it was probably my husband, because he's definitely loves to trigger me with his like 8 energy. He connects through conflict, and I usually pull away from that. But the first time maybe he said something that would normally have sent me, and I just sat there and felt the reaction, and then felt, wow, there is a space here, and I can do this differently. I can say, hey, ouch, that was hurtful. I know you don't mean that. Can we revisit that without a passive aggressive tone? And then it changed me forever, because that made me want to find the space again and find the space again, because it gave me an ability to be who I wanted to be,
Hmm.
no matter what
That's
he throws
that's
at me. Bring it.
You hear that, Todd? You hear that, Todd? Bring it on. Bring it on. I'm sure he's listening right now. She's a mindfulness master. Um,
Yeah.
well, I think this is amazing. This probably, we could go on forever. We're definitely going to do some more. I wrote down some notes. We're going to do one on the 9 different ways to be mindful around, the suffering, how each night Enneagram type experiences it, because it's very different. Um,
The 9
the,
second arrows.
the 9-second arrows. I like that one. I'm
Yeah.
writing it down. The body, mind, the mind, the body or gut, and the heart, and how that impacts the way we navigate. So we have no shortage of things to talk about, my friend. That's for
Yeah, 'cause
sure.
in that space, you can discover so much about yourself.
And that's what we're going to do. So in the meantime, anybody who's listening, jump over to Julie's website. Again, is it mindfulmouse.com?
Correct. MAUS, the German mouse.
Mindful Mouse. An amazing book, by the way, Mouse, Maus. So with that, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate your wisdom, your generosity of spirit, your insights. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, B. Appreciate the
All
opportunity.
right. Namaste.
Have
I'll
a
see
good
you
one.
next time. To all of my listeners, defy your number and live your spirit.